Hello and welcome to the regular Wednesday broadcast of Strategic Speaking for Results, also Speakers Who Get Results podcast. I'm so excited to have the amazing Jen Coken here today as my guest. And let me just start with the official bio to give you an idea of, you will see how fabulous she is, but to give you officially, we can say that Jen Coken, coaches executive women to embrace their genius, shatter their limiting beliefs, and surrender to the extraordinary power of living an authentic life. She's an international executive coach. She's a Fortune 500 speaker, imposter syndrome expert, speaker, author. Jen is on a global mission to empower C-suite level executives and their teams to have the audacity to be themselves and lead without limits. So Jen Coken, welcome to Strategic Speaking for Results.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yay. Well, the reason I wanted to interview you today is I just published an episode of the Speakers Who Get Results podcast called Are You Erasing Yourself from the Picture? The reason I wanted to talk about that is because I work with helping high-level women become more visible and more valued, especially women who aren't being heard. Part of it is teaching people how to listen to you, the people who are not listening to you, but a large part of it is the inner game, the inner mindset of women who erase themselves from the picture. And I thought, who can I ask to give us some good comments about that? Jen Coken, yay, there she is. So Jen, let's comment a little bit on why it is that women forget to include themselves in the picture.
I think number one, we're dealing with centuries of women not being in charge. I'll say it, patriarchy. Centuries, we as females, when we're born, we are born into and carrying with us the historical nature of being a female from all our foremothers, our mothers and grandmothers before us. And we're born into a construct where men dominate. And I'm not blaming men for any of this, but we are born into a patriarchal society and system and raised by other women who have had a particular role to play. Certain women of certain age. I'm in my 50s. I think we're about the same age. I think women in their 20s and 30s somewhat have a much easier time because society has become more bendable in a way. But for me, my first jobs, I had to wear pantyhose. I had to wear skirts below my knees. I had to wear jackets because I was not allowed to show my femininity. And certainly as a female, you're never supposed to ask the other person out. So I was never trained how to ask for what I want. In my household growing up, I was quiet because there was anger and I didn't want to be on the receiving end of that anger. And I was supposed to do what I could to help mom out. Now that's the upbringing, but it doesn't just stay in your childhood. You bring that mindset unbeknownst to you to the boardroom.
I will say in terms of the rules of the patriarchy, quote unquote, is in earlier centuries, there were very good reasons to have men be the hunters and the warriors and have women be the gatherers and the ones at home. In the days where you could have wolves coming in to attack your village or the village next, or the feudal state next door coming to attack, it made sense that the men had to use their strength to protect the women, and the women evolved in ways to learning how to defer to the men, because without the men, they would starve. So
yes, yeah. and women learned how to caretake the children, and were in that mode of protecting the children. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Totally in agreement.
Actually, in my 30 years in opera, most of the texts of the 18th and 19th century operas, there's a whole band of literature around women and servants manipulating the men in order to get what they need, because they truly do not have the power. I mean, if the count throws you out, fires you as a servant, you really do have nowhere else to go. You will then starve. So there is a long tradition of it. Breaking free of that tradition, or learning how to live with that tradition, perhaps, is
find your own way, right?
find
Like,
your
how
own
do you
way.
find your own way? Yeah. And when, right in 2018, there were 25 women who led Fortune 500 companies
Mm-hmm.
and 23 men named John.
Uh-huh.
So when women get to that C-suite executive level, they don't see a lot of examples, and unbeknownst to them, they are bringing that history with them. And
Mm-hmm.
unless they're conscious about that, they will naturally not. I was listening to your broadcast last week. They wouldn't be thinking about, what, from the beginning, I'm going to be thinking about bringing the marketing team along with me to ask them, let me give you the talking points.
Let's put this in context. This is the story of my client Evelyn, who created a major merger. She had a major idea for her company.
Major merger.
A major merger. Yes. Is an idea that would create a partnership between two globally known organizations. She worked on it for 5 years, but she spent so much time praising the team and not reminding people that it was her idea, that when the time came to launch it, the marketing team forgot. They took her for granted. She was part of the scenery, and they sent all the interview requests to a manager who had only been there for 2 months. It was her baby, and they sent the request to someone who didn't know anything about it, but had a title. So your comment about this was?
My comment about this was, did she from the beginning, as I was listening to it, go to the marketing team, or at some point where they knew the merger was coming? Just want to remind you, I'm the one who came up with the idea. I've been leading the team. Here's the talking points that I think are really important, that would be really salient, and why this is such a unique merger that I think would be very effective for the marketing strategy. And my other question to you is, who is going to be your spokespeople? Because I want to be that spokesperson when the media requests come in. Now, maybe there were so many, she didn't have enough bandwidth to go around, but women are used to not being demanding, but making requests. See, I think that's a really nuanced piece. You should give this to me. Or I'm great. That's the bragging, or the demanding, or even the manipulation, because we are trained to manipulate from the historical perspective that we've come from. How do we make a request? When you make a request, people have an option: yes, no, or maybe. And so to be able to say, I'm requesting that I am a spokesperson when the media comes, and stopping there, no need to explain. I'm the expert. It was my idea. I've been leading the team. Here's the talking points. And my request is, I am the main spokesperson for the media. Would that be okay?
Yeah.
And then figuring out from there. But we're not automatically thinking that way. It's either, and it's for men and women too. I think we think our work should be recognized. We should have been included.
Well, it's so easy when you know what you're doing. And this is why it's really helps to have a coach like you, or a coach like me on the outside, who can say, wait, here's something you're taking for granted because you know it, but it's not coming across. Wait, how did you make that leap? How did you get from this point to that point? I don't get it. Oh, because it's something that you assume, but you actually do have to tell us when you're doing a speech, for instance. What's the difference between forgetting to include something because you know it so well, and actually being stopped by imposter syndrome? Because being stopped seems like a lot more active. It's more of an active thing. Or am I, you're the expert. Enlighten me about that.
Yeah, let's give some baseline of knowledge for imposter syndrome itself. So if that's okay. So imposter syndrome, using the word, excuse me, syndrome is a bit of a misnomer because it's not a diagnosable disease. Imposter phenomenon. Most people know it as syndrome. Okay. That's the catchphrase. If you Google that, I think there's like 5.3 million hits on Google about imposter syndrome. So it's a phenomenon. It was coined in the 70s by Suzanne Imes and Pauline Clancy. And they found that really high achieving people doubted their success, wondered how they got to be where they got to, including people like Albert Einstein, who said, I'm afraid people are going to figure out I'm an involuntary swindler. Margaret Cho, who used to head the World Health Organization, shied away from being called an expert. Maya Angelou, who had written a dozen books, on her 12th book, she said, I feel like someone's going to knock on the door and say, who do you think you are? We're not doing anything with that 12th book. So really famous, well-known people have this experience of questioning and doubting themselves. How do they come by that? We all have this. It's not just really high achieving people. I've coached almost 10,000 people over the last 23 years. Everybody across the board has imposter syndrome. So how do they come by it? We all come by it very naturally. See, our brain is designed to keep the thing it's a brain of alive, which is you and me. So the brain is always determining threat. Will it eat me? Can I eat it? Right? The guys have gone off to hunt and the wolves come around and the brain's like, can I eat that wolf or is it going to eat me, etc. The brain can't discern between a real threat and a perceived threat. So for example, if you've ever gone to an IMAX theater, which none of us have in the last year, but remember watching a movie even on TV, and a roller coaster is a good example. And if the camera is the point of view of the person going on the roller coaster, your stomach drops just the way the person who was on the roller coaster probably did, because your brain is thinking that's a threat. So your brain's constantly determining threat. The average brain has anywhere from 12,000 to 60,000 thoughts a day. 80 to 85% are negative, 95% are repetitive. And so when we're out and about, we're always thinking, what is the level of threat? And what happens is certain very innocuous things happen to us in our childhood. It doesn't have to be dramatic or traumatic. And in that moment, we're embarrassed. We feel like we don't belong. Some negative experience, or we can experience it, comes into play. And we become a perfectionist where I had a client at age of 9 brings home a C. Her dad, what's up with the C? Her, Dad, it's average. Give me 1,500 words on average. And she is shocked and embarrassed, never wants to let that happen again. So she's got to get everything right. Which propelled her to great heights. That's the other thing about imposter syndrome. It is a superpower too. And I'll talk about the 5 aspects, but it is a superpower. So it propels her to the top of her company, except it sucked working for her. And she was miserable and unhappy, knew she was in her own way, didn't know how she got there. So one aspect of imposter syndrome is this perfectionist tendency of getting it right all the time. There's the individualist who can't ask for help for fear they'll be exposed as a fraud because I should be able to do this myself. I shouldn't have to rely on anybody. There's the Superman or woman. And these archetypes, I'll call them, were coined by Dr. Valerie Young in her book that came out in about 2008, 2009. So perfectionist, individual, superwoman, Superman. How I earn my feeling of feeling good about myself is working really, really hard. The natural genius, which is the one I always identified with, things came easy to me. So if I can't see my way clear from point A to point B, if you said to me, Jen, I want you to give a speech. I've got a great speaking opportunity. It's not really in your wheelhouse, but I think it'd be a great opportunity for you on quantum physics. First, you'd have to convince me that I had something to say about quantum physics. But secondly, I would likely procrastinate writing that speech because I can't see my way clear. So it causes me to procrastinate, and it causes me to stay within my comfort zone. Sometimes I don't push boundaries to step onto that bigger stage, et cetera, because it doesn't seem to be quite easy coming to me. And the 5th one is the expert.
Mhm.
The person who has a lot of degrees, who really knows everything. I was talking to a client yesterday, and she's been asked to speak on big stages, parts of panels, the expert in the room. And she's wondering who's going to raise their hand and say, you don't know what you're talking about, because the inside doesn't match the outside. So
Right.
I think, in answer to your question, I'm going to land the plane. I think it's always imposter syndrome running the show, unless you're conscious that that's what's running the show and can discern between that voice in your head. That's the ongoing inner critic
Yeah.
that sounds like your mom, your dad, your teacher, and the true essence of who you are, so that that still small voice within you is the one who's actually running the show.
You know, we were
Mostly it's
talking,
not.
yeah, we were talking before the interview about how you were talking about the taking time to be still and to listen. As I actually think about a lot of this is what Jen is talking about is the inner game. I do a lot with the outer game. You know, I like strategy. I like the strategy. I like putting together, helping you put together your script, helping you with your delivery style. If you are stuck on the inside, Jen is the person who really works on the inner game and how to help you be ready to use the tools of the outer game.
Yeah, and own the strategy, because you can be working with somebody who's resistant, and you probably have, to what you're saying, who is resistant to truly owning their expertise. And I think there's truly three parts of the inner game. It's your mindset about your relationship to yourself. That's the imposter syndrome.
Mhm.
It's your mindset to your relationship to your voice. Do I have a
Mhm.
right to be in the room? And it's your mindset to the people who are in the room. You
Right.
know, who are,
Exactly.
even speaking up at a meeting, what's my relationship to the other people at the meeting? Do I feel like I have agency to be able to be in this room with these other people? I had a client who said, I was just asked to be part of a major, Fortune 50 company, maybe even Fortune 10 company strategy session for creative. And I don't know why they asked me. And that
Mhm.
was the first thing we went to work on, is her being able to own her genius.
Right. And my solution for all of this is finding the allies. I like to think about one of the things that I help people with is to help them get the funding they need, funding, allies, and recognition. Funding being whether it's getting a raise, getting a promotion, getting funding for your company. Allies are who are the people you want to work with. And I go back to allies over and over again of how if the imposter syndrome is talking to us, talking so loud, can you enroll an ally to remind you how amazing you are, for instance?
I freaking love that. I'm going to tell you why. I think too often, especially because that's how you and I know each other, is through a group of amazing female business owners and entrepreneurs.
Mhm.
And we are in this group that we're a part of. It is like nothing I've ever been a part of, because there's usually so much competition
Yeah.
in a networking group or in a small group. But what somebody said to me once, my job is not, when your crown is off center, if you're the queen and your crown's off center, my job is not to tell everybody else what a goofball you look like when your crown is off center. My job is to straighten it without you even knowing.
Oh,
So
I
I
love that.
think,
I love that.
isn't that great?
Yeah.
So, you can have an ally who suffers from imposter syndrome just like you do, because
Mhm.
in that conversation, I think one of the things that people don't realize, not just women, men, they don't realize that other people think the way that they do, that other people doubt themselves. They think they're
Mhm.
the only one. My inner critic is so loud. Really? So that's what everybody says. Everybody I coach, that's what they say.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things I was thinking about when I was talking about, are you erasing yourself from the picture? And one of the strategies we used with my client who was ignored when this giant collaboration was announced is the repair strategy, if you will, was to create little stories, little places where she could drop a seed here and there to say, uh, And oh, by the way, say this was my idea. I think back to 5 years ago when nobody thought this could ever happen. I'm so proud of how my idea came out. And then thank you to the team, and how amazing the team is, but don't forget to include yourself in the team. The other part about that is, as you tell these stories, you are reminding yourself as well. So if you practice the stories, I certainly know that when I tell about the success a client has had, I am reminded on a subconscious level, the voices in my head are reminded that, oh yeah, I did make a difference.
Yeah.
My advice made an impact.
Made a difference.
Mm-hmm.
Many nutritionists say you are what you eat. I say you are what you speak.
Oh, yeah.
You are what you speak. Because I will tell you, Elizabeth, the things that I say to myself, I would never say to you. The things you say to yourself, you would never say to me. So if we were to ever say those things out loud, the people around us would look at us like we are crazy.
Yeah.
And sometimes those allies are the ones you need to hold the bucket, the verbal vomit bucket. I had to do this about 2 weeks ago. I called a friend of mine and said, look, I just need you to hold the bucket.
Okay.
And I had to share all the garbage that was in my head of why I thought I was such a jerk and why I'll never amount to anything. It doesn't matter how successful I am. It doesn't matter what level of success you get to. We still have doubts and questions. It's just the brain doing its thing.
Yeah.
The question is, what are you going to be committed to? Your commitment to show up as a leader, caring, compassionate, playful, irreverent, smart, contagious, meaning not COVID, but contagious joy, if that's what you want? Or are you going to be more committed to beating yourself up? And one of the ways that those allies I'm talking about, so I have to have allies that'll hold the bucket. And then I'm like, oh my God, all this stuff is coming out of my mouth. And it all comes down to how I kill plants. And I just have to stop. Thank you for holding the bucket. Are you complete? I'm complete. Good. Can we talk about how to move on?
Kill plants?
Because everything with me, whenever I'm in a spiral, it all comes down to, which is crazy because I have a ton of plants in my house and I have a really big green thumb, but it used to be how I can't keep a plant alive. And I'm a bad mom to my cats. It would just spiral all the way down.
Got it. Okay. Okay. I wondered about that. So Jen, how can we recognize imposter syndrome when it's getting in the way? How can we recognize that's what's stopping us?
Yeah. So there's a couple of different ways. One is I would recommend people go take my quiz, jencokenquiz.com, JENCOKEN quiz.com. I think it's in my description of myself.
And we'll put a link in the yeah.
Go ahead.
We'll post a link too. Yeah.
Yeah. So then you can get to better understand your flavor. Now you probably have one from column A, one from column B, one from column C, but one kind of sticks out more than the other. The first step is to admit you have a problem. So you identify your particular flavor, and then you become an observer in your life to see what triggers it, trips you up. Then we create a new neural pathway, but so most coaches would give you tips and tools. I don't do that because I could say to you, go catch it, okay, go catch it. And then ask yourself how you want to show up, which is, you could do that. And I tell people, notice when you're at the effect of wanting to work really hard to prove yourself, or you don't want to ask for help, or you're micromanaging. I used to be a massive micromanager. Stop and pause. And I always do this because when the brain takes about 500 repetitions to learn a new habit. When you introduce play, it is said it reduces it to 10 or 12. So I can give you that, but that's going to leave you managing your mind for the rest of your life. Instead, you want to find a coach like me, somebody else the work that I do is I help people get to their originating incident. Because we all have that moment, we put it together. We identify and disrupt that main pattern. We look at those trips and triggers, and then for you together, create that new neural pathway. How do you want to show up? How do you want to be known? And we develop practices that you can experiment with. So actually on the 25th, when I'm doing this free webinar, that's some of the work I will be doing, although we won't necessarily have a chance to dig deep to get back to the originating incident, but we'll stick our toe in the shallow end of the pool.
Okay, so that's good. So that actually was both of my questions, was to recognize it and then to change the mindset. Again, being aware, that's also a huge thing. It's one of the reasons why I spend 6 months with people. I am amazed that you can do it in an afternoon. You can help someone in an afternoon. I spend 6 months with people because recognizing where you are sabotaging yourself or recognizing where imposter syndrome comes in happens over time. And then the more you're aware of it, the more you can go, we had a conversation before we started recording about me remembering in my 30s, a moment where I recognized that I was walking into a trap with my mom. Walking into a trap with my mom is a trap I'd always walked into before. And I actually stopped. And I have never forgotten that. It's like, I don't have to go down this path. So the same thing with the imposter syndrome. It takes practice.
Except we don't do it in an afternoon. We don't do it in an afternoon. So the imposter syndrome, there's really two parts. And I'm not changing anybody's mind, because when you're changing the mind, it's like putting icing on a mud pie. It doesn't make it a delicious pie. It's still icing hiding mud. What we're doing is excavating that major brain pattern. And we're doing this over 3 sessions. This is just an imposter syndrome, 3 sessions, identifying and disrupting it. Session 1, between 1 and 2, you're identifying the trigger. Session 2, we dial those in, ask the question, how do you want to show up? Identify new practices that you can practice by session 3. Now, for some people, they're good, except they're not. Because as you say, you then need to practice and experiment with those practices. And then I work with people over 6 months. Because every time that new meeting or the new project or the new relationship or whatever it is,
new trigger,
they get triggered.
Yeah.
And it's all about practicing and training that new neural pathway and those new habits.
Well, Jen Coken, it has been such a joy to have you here. I'm just thrilled. How can we find out more from you?
Thank you for asking that. And it's been a joy to be here too. You can go to my website, jencoken.com, JenCoken.com, to find out more about me. You can take the quiz, jencokenquiz.com. And then we'll put the link for the free webinar on the 25th in the comments. We'll put the link for the quiz in the comments. But on my website, you'll learn a lot more about me. If you want to reach out and email me, you can, jen@jencoken.com. I try to keep it consistent and easy.
Okay. Thank you so much for having been on the weekly broadcast for Strategic Speaking for Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host. And as a reminder, not only can you learn about yourself and your inner game with Jen Coken at jencokenquiz.com, but if you're interested in the outer game and how to get better results when you are speaking, you can take my quiz, which is the speakforresultsquiz.com. And that's where you can see where your presentation skills are strong and where a little bit of support could get you the recognition and the results that you want. So thank you all very much. I'll see you next week.